You can see how, though, for somebody who doesn't already believe that God is all powerful, that God is perfect, and so on and so forth, which is the kind of person that you're trying to speak to in your ministry, saying that, well, these things which we're not comfortable with, I know you don't think that evil can exist in the absence of God, but these things which seem absolutely terrible, they're either free will or we don't know God's will. These are basically the two reasons for me. Can you see how those reasons could not be compelling from a rational perspective for somebody who sees such terrible things happen? To tell them that from the apologetic perspective, which is supposedly the rational, not the faith-based part of the perspective, that, well, you have to have faith because we don't know God's will. Can you see how that's not convincing from the outside perspective, potentially, even though already believing in God?
Oh, sure. I'm not talking about persuasion. I'm talking about facts here. There's a difference between proof and persuasion. Okay. You can prove something and people won't be persuaded by it. This is why I don't talk about apologetics with people who have just gone through evil. They don't need a philosopher. They need a pastor. I mean, look what happened. You brought up Job earlier. Look what happened when all of his friends showed up. They tried to lecture him back to reality. Of course, they were wrong in everything they said, right? And I've had friends of mine who have lost people to suicide. And they will say, people will come to them and say the most awkward statements trying to be comforting, and they're not. I don't need a lecture. I just need your presence. So, yes, I agree that talking about reasons in the wake of an enormous tragedy is not going to be persuasive. It may actually seem offensive, but we're not talking about right after a tragedy. We're talking academically from a reason perspective. Does the concept of evil even make sense if there's no standard beyond us? And I'm saying, no, it doesn't. And I think most philosophers now would agree with that. They come up with all sorts of cockamamie ways to get around it, but it doesn't work. Because if there is no standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey, then everything's a matter of opinion. And if everything's a matter of opinion, so's murder, so's rape, so's theft, so are those things that we know are really wrong. But of course, since we know they're really wrong, there must be a standard by which we're judging them to be really wrong. So yeah, let me agree with you. There's a difference between proof and persuasion.
It's true. This is a question of truth, not necessarily preference.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, right, we're not getting to that truth through, let's say, scientific methods in the way that, cures to cancer might, even though, scientific claims that might be able to be squared with Christianity. So just from the point of view of truth, what sources we have are there. It is ultimately the Bible, right, for Christians. To go back to, I believe it was, John, when talking about doubting Thomas, I wanted to quickly come back to that idea of belief that and belief in, because there's a verse, and Alex O'Connor talked about this some time ago when he was, hosting Stuart and Cliff Nectal. He pointed out a really interesting verse: "Blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed." And I think that's actually really resonated with me, in that while doubting Thomas, yes, it's good that he's given evidence. At the same time, John seems to be writing that it's still better to believe without having that evidence. That seems to be the feeling of the tone, the tonality of what John is writing, right? So just to repeat that for those listening: blessed are those who have not seen and have yet believed. And that comes right after he tells Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed.
Yes, he is saying that they're not going to have the exact same evidence that Thomas had, but he's not saying that they have no evidence. And in fact, the whole passage here is about evidence. It's about signs that were written down by an eyewitness. And by the way, this is true even in science. We take most of what we believe scientifically on authority. Scientists can't replicate every experiment that's ever been done. They take it on authority, what other people have done and written down. Hey, here's what we found in our experiment. Oh, okay. I'm taking that on authority. So that's true of every historical event. Every historical event can't be repeated in the laboratory. It's based on a couple of things. It's based on either eyewitness testimony and or artifacts that are left behind, like archaeology. That's how we reconstruct the past. Of course, in the modern age, we have video and audio and that kind of thing. But in ancient history, they didn't have all that stuff. But it's still...
Well, it's a shame Jesus wasn't resurrected more
What's
recently.
That?
It's a shame Jesus wasn't resurrected more recently. We might have been able to capture that. It might have been a pretty convincing argument for Christianity, right?
No, unfortunately, it would be the opposite. We'd go, oh, this is an AI fake, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
And by the way, we wouldn't even have the scientific method if it wasn't for Christianity, because the scientific method came out of the idea that God is a lawgiver, created and sustains these laws. That's why all the founders of modern science were Christians. And some will say, well, of course they were all Christians. That was the cultural view of the day. Well, if that's the case, why didn't science develop in China?